Memory of a sea-shaped youth. The ocean dazzles the eye today, sparkling as far as the horizon. The water rushes the shore, regathers itself, waits, and rushes again, each time breathing out an essence of innocence, a bouquet of childhood days at the beach. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in to the 95th show in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live from the enduring and vanishing coast of Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully. Broadcast 94 was about seeing and feeling into places of greater aliveness, greater vibrancy and vividness of being, living, and experiencing, largeness of self. This week is about remembering and forgetting, the memorable and the ephemeral, what and how we recall or seek to recollect, what we choose to forget or file far away inside, and the value of both the lasting and the fleeting in our lives and the larger world around us. I hope these next sharings of cultural commentary to poetry I've curated to inquire and discover around together offer each of you, all of us, some interesting windows. Well, let's begin, shall we, with Sharon Olds' poem, Earliest Memory. Light, not bright, but deep. No beams. Light like heat enclosed, a room full like a mouthful of light, and bars upright that interrupt the light, stripe it evenly. Light bar. Light solid as pond water. Bar a bluish shadow. Another amber band of light, someone moving across it. Into the narrow door of the bar and out again, through the perfect intervals of light, dark, light. The figure ranges slowly, freely. The bars do not waver, vertical, still, they hold. The light does not dilute, it is full, steady. Within it, the person moves, large and calm, back and forth, and at times, behind and above her, for a moment, the white angle of the wall and ceiling bent like a wing, border of the sweet box of the room where she swam in light, delicately striped, where I lay whole and watched. Thank you, Sharon Olds. Charles Simich's poem, Simich, The Wooden Toy. The brightly painted horse had a boy's face and 4 small wheels under his feet, plus a long string to pull him by this way and that across the floor, should you care to. A string in waiting that slipped away in many whiles from each and every try. Knock and they'll answer, Mother told me, so I climbed 4 flights of stairs and went in unannounced, and found a small wooden toy for the taking. In the ensuing emptiness and the fading daylight, that still gives me a shudder, as if I had held the key to mysteries in my hand. Where's the lost and found department, and the quiet entry, the undeveloped film of the few clear moments of our blurred lives? Where's the drop of blood and the teeny nail that pricked my finger as I bent down to touch the toy and caught its eye? Evening light. Make me a Sunday go-to meeting shadow for my toy. My dearest memories are steep stairwells in dusty buildings on dead-end streets where I talk to the walls and closed doors as if they understood me. The wooden toy sitting pretty. No, quieter than that, like the sound of eyebrows raised by a villain in a silent movie. Psst, someone said behind my back. Thank you, Charles Simic. Here's a childhood memory of mine from my seaside summers. The Barber in the Dell. From Bayhead, New Jersey. Who wore a green plastic visor, who the color of a ginger ale bottle, who had a raspy voice and Charles Coburn kind of face. A forever bachelor who wore spectacles he could barely see through, which is why he sometimes clipped your ear with his quick silver scissors. Whose name was the same as the sign on the window by the striped pole, Dell's. Whose small, single-story shop and soled chrome and leather chair sat between the shingled houses facing Twilight Lake. In the town by the sea where my boyhood summers swam, where my mother brought my young head of sun-blonde hair to be cut now and then by the green-visored old barber in that dell. And this one also from those days, those golden days for me along the Atlantic, carefree days at play as a boy, and especially with my cherished cousins, the Cassidys. This is board walking. Some of you may relate. A Monopoly day. A day to stay snug inside, in a wool sweater and long pants, away from the rain and gray clouds over the ocean and shingled houses, to cozy up on downy cushions round the square board and its rainbow of real estate and bright paper money. Put on a top hat or a silver shoe and go, have a roll through childhood. Glide carefree down blue and purple avenues, past park places, through yellow gardens and memories of hundreds of damp, skin-cool summer days like this. Playing property owner, house builder, hotelier, railroader, taxpayer. Taking turns and chances. Board walking a walk from the beach while the sun and August heat take their own brief holiday. Board walking. Here's Dana Gioia's poem, Finding a Box of Family Letters. The dead say little in their letters they haven't said before. We find no secrets, and yet how different every sentence sounds heard across the years. My father breaks my heart simply by being so young and handsome. He's half my age with jet black hair. Look at him in his Navy uniform grinning beside his dive bomber. Come back, Dad, I want to shout. He says he misses all of us, though I haven't yet been born. He writes from places I never knew he saw, and everyone he mentions now is dead. There is a large, long photograph curled like a diploma, a banquet 60 years ago. My parents sit uncomfortably among tables of dark-suited strangers. The mildewed paper reeks of regret. I wonder what song the band was playing, just out of frame, as the photographer arranged your smiles. A waltz? A foxtrot? Get out there on the floor and dance. You don't have forever. What does it cost to send a postcard to the underworld? I'll buy a penny stamp from World War II and mail it downtown at the old post office, just as the courthouse clock strikes 12. Surely the ghost of some postal worker still makes his nightly rounds, his routine too tedious for him to notice when it ended. He works so slowly he moves back in time, carrying our dead letters to their lost addresses. It's silly to get sentimental. The dead have moved on. So should we. But isn't it equally simple-minded to miss the special expertise of the departed in clarifying our long-term plans? They never let us forget that the line between them and us is only temporary. Get out there and dance. The letters shout, adding, love always. Can't wait to get home. And soon we will be. See you there. Thank you, Dana Gioia. Lillian and Mary is a memento of a kind to myself, of a lifelong memory of a resonant experience when I was all of just 5 years old. Lillian, who we called Allie, was my mother's mother. And Mary, well, you're about to find out who Mary is. So Lillian and Mary. A 5-year-old hand holding a 65-year-old hand a lifetime ago. Standing at the open mouth of the mammoth grand salon of the soon-to-sail ocean liner she was steaming away on in a cloud of confetti, maybe to England or France. The itinerary no longer remains or matters, just that moment when I stood at the edge of another age, with two proud old ladies, my grandmother Lillian, with her calico, cat-soft voice and mink stole, and the Queen Mary, with her stout red lipstick stacks, preparing to cross the Atlantic together, and a little camel-capped and coated boy floating there, with his mother somewhere behind the scene, for a bon voyage. Lillian and Mary. Oliver Sacks, in his book Hallucinations, which I spoke about some programs back once at least, very interesting book, says this rather poetically about our memories. We now know that memories are not fixed or frozen like Proust's jars of preserves in a larder, but are transformed, disassembled, reassembled, and recategorized with every act of recollection. For researchers in the 20th century, the early 20th century, memories were imprints in the brain. As for Socrates, they were analogous to impressions made in soft wax, imprints that could be activated by the act of recollection. It was not until the critical studies of Frederick Bartlett at Cambridge in the 1920s and 30s, that the classical view could be disputed, whereas Ebbinghaus and other early investigators had studied rote memory. How many digits could be remembered, for instance? Bartlett presented his subjects with pictures of or stories and accounts of what they had seen or heard were somewhat different and sometimes quite transformed on each remembering. That convinced Bartlett to think in terms not of a static thing called, quote, memory, but rather a dynamic process of, quote, remembering. And he wrote this: remembering is not the re-excitation of innumerable fixed, lifeless, and fragmentary traces. It is an imaginative reconstruction or construction built out of the relation of our attitude toward a whole active mass of organized past reactions or experience. It is thus hardly ever really exact. Thank you, Oliver Sacks and Ebbinghaus and Bartlett. Okay. Well, are you familiar with Rashomon? The great Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa created a cinematic metaphor for the slippery, memory-mediated nature of truth in his 1950 film Rashomon. For those of you who know or don't know, a psychological, philosophical thriller about the murder of a samurai and its four witnesses who each recount a radically different reality, each equally believable, thus undermining our most elemental trust in truth. His masterpiece lent its name to the amply documented unreliability of eyewitness accounts, the Rashomon effect, it's called. Very interesting. We only exist, after all, as eyewitnesses of our own lives. So, yeah, think about that. There was also a film with Henry Fonda, 12 Angry Men, about a court case, the original one, and it was similar aspect of that. Makes me think of that this particular moment, actually. The writer, painter, sculptor Etel Adnan. Memory and time, both immaterial, are rivers with no banks and constantly merging. Both escape our will, though we depend on them. Measured, but measured by whom or by what? The one is inside, the other outside, or so it seems, but is that true? Time seems also buried deep in us, but where? Memory is right here in the head, but it can exit, abandon the head, leave it behind, disappear. Memory, a sanctuary of infinite patience. Is memory produced by us, or is it us? Our identity is very likely whenever our memory decides to retain, but let's not presume that memory is a storage room, not a tool for being able to think. It's thinking before thinking. It also makes an apparently simple thing like crossing the room possible. It's impossible to separate it from what it remembers. Okay, well, there's a lot of food for thought on that. I've go back and chew on that again myself. I've read it a few times, but I'm going to read that again. From the marginalia on the Mobius strip of Remembering and Forgetting, Teju Cole, on the paradox of photography and how it clarifies the central anxiety of existence. He said photography is at the nerve center of our paradoxical memorial impulses. We need it there for how it helps us frame our losses, but we can also sense it crowding in on ongoing experience, imposing closure on what should still be open. I was very intrigued with that, so I was reading more about it of his and from his book, Known and Strange Things. And I'll just give you this one other piece. When the photograph outlives the body, when people die, scenes change, trees grow, or are chopped down, it becomes a memorial. And when the thing photographed is a work of art or architecture that has been destroyed, this effect is amplified even further. A painting, sculpture, or temple, as a record of both human skill and emotion, is already a site of memory. When its only remaining trace is a photograph, that becomes a memorial to a memory. Such a photograph is shadowed by its vanished ancestor. Thank you, Teju Cole. Also something to ponder more. Well, I also felt it fitting to talk about love, different dimensions of it around our theme. And because there's, I suppose, certainly for me and others, there's so much to hold fast to in our memories of it, and others to let go of parts of it. And that brought me back to John O'Donohue and his incredible, to me, book, Anamkara, a book of Celtic wisdom. If you don't know it, and you're interested, it may pull you way in. And he talked in there about love as ancient recognition. He said, real friendship or love is not manufactured or achieved by an act of will or intention. Friendship is always an act of recognition. This metaphor can be grounded in the clay nature of the human body. When you find the person you love, an act of ancient recognition brings you together. It's as if millions of years before the silence of nature broke, your lover's clay and your clay lay side by side. Then, in the turning of the seasons, your one clay divided and separated. You began to rise as distinct clay forms, each housing a different individuality and destiny. Without even knowing it, your secret memory mourned your loss of each other. While your clay selves wandered for thousands of years through the universe, your longing for each other never faded. This metaphor helps to explain how in the moment of friendship, two souls suddenly recognize each other. There's an awakening between you, a sense of ancient knowing. Love opens the door of ancient recognition. You enter. You come home to each other at last. Thank you, John O'Donohue. I also thought of Lawrence Ferlinghetti from A Far Rockaway of the Heart. Always loved this poem. It's number 2 in that collection. Driving a cardboard automobile without a license at the turn of the century, my father ran into my mother on a fun ride at Coney Island, having spied each other eating in a French boarding house nearby. And having decided right there and then that she was right for him entirely, he followed her into the playland of that evening, where the headlong meeting of their ephemeral flesh on wheels hurtled them forever together. And I now in the back seat of their eternity, reaching out to embrace them. Thank you, Ferlinghetti. Stardust Melody, the song by Hoagie Carmichael, came to mind around this particular subset of our theme, and then explorings and musings and discoverings. That was, is, and was in many minds and hearts, past and present. Hear the lyrics. I just thought I'd just share the lyrics. I'm not going to sing it. I'm just going to share the lyrics. But it's a beautiful song. You probably know it if you haven't. Listened to him sing it, his original version, Hoagie Carmichael. And now the purple dusk of twilight time steals across the meadows of my heart. High up in the sky, the little stars climb, always reminding me that we're apart You wander down the lane and far away, leaving me a song that will not die. Love is now the stardust of yesterday, the music of the years gone by. Sometimes I wonder how I spend the lonely nights, dreaming of a song. The melody haunts my reverie, and I am once again with you. When our love was new, and each kiss an inspiration, but that was long ago, and now my consolation is in the stardust of a song. Beside the garden wall, when stars are bright, you are in my arms. The nightingale tells his fairy tale of paradise where roses grew. Though I dream in vain, in my heart it will remain, my stardust melody, the memory of love's refrain. Thank you, Hoagie Carmichael. Love that song. Love hearing it, love singing it. That brought me next to a story character, one of a number from my immersive exhibition Behind the Curtain. Actually, a few of you listening, I think, were actually at one of those shows, different places. I had them in Brooklyn and Washington and out west and elsewhere. This was The Romantic. Is a man of dreams and dreaminess, of love's music in the night that can be heard, can be made, of the oldest magic word written, sometimes hidden in the shadows, that he can read. And now that he's met you, don't ever doubt, dear, he won't forget you, not your profile or the way you kissed on a night like this. The Romantic. How about this poem? This is a poem called The Kiss that I wrote for a friend in the Midwest after a story he told me about a single kiss that stayed with him, an unexpected kiss, most of his life. Maybe you've had similar indelible moments. This is The Kiss. A Cavafy dream come true, man to man, an impassioned stranger entering a room, entering your gaze, and then the body of your mouth, your youth. A kiss that has lasted nearly half a century in the taste of your memory. And here's Amy Lowell, some poems from China. This one is called Ephemera. Silver green lanterns tossing among windy branches, so an old man thinks of the loves of his youth. Thank you, Amy Lowell. Some questions for you, listeners. I'm curious, as I sometimes am, and ask you very direct things. What are your most cherished memories? Which ones are floating into your consciousness right now as we go along? What makes something greatly memorable for you? What would you like to recall more of, or more vividly, or more feelingly from another part of your life, your past? How do you go about keeping your memories alive? Do you really forget things? Or just tuck them away somewhere and can't recall them easily? And what new memories are you creating? Among memories we surely all have are of people beautiful or colorful or somehow quite meaningful in our lives, our times, even if fleetingly. And I have a couple here I'd like to share, and I'd like to think of your own people. But This was a beloved man to me, Earl Burgett. He's not alive now, but this was on his 87th birthday some years back. And sometimes I write things to greatly remember things. It's a lot of times why I write, too. It's touchstones back to my own life, moments, experiences, feelings, inspirations, other things. And this was partly to remember that man, touch back to that man. This was called 1924, a vintage year. Like fine wine, there are men of great vintage years. Men who have grown through seasons of hail and rain, a near century of sun and blue skies, starry nights. Deep-rooted men of character and minerality, whose youthful tannins have matured beautifully, who brim with fruit and history and still pour forth exceptional flavor, unforgettable pleasure. Vintage men like you, worth savoring. Blessings to that man out in the cosmos, Earl Burgett. He's in my molecules. Joyce Sutphin has this poem, The Aunts. I like it when they get together and talk in voices that sound like apple trees and grapevines, and some of them wear hats and go to Arizona in the winter, and they all like to play cards. They will always be the ones who say, quote, "It is time to go now," even as we linger at the door or stand by the waiting cars. They remember someone, an uncle we never knew, and sigh, all of them together, like wind in the oak trees behind the farm where they grew up, a place I remember, especially the hen house and the soft clucking that filled the sunlight yard. Thank you, Joyce Sutphin. I definitely wanted to share with you, as I was putting things together, the poem by Billy Collins, "The Death of the Hat," because there's a whole cultural aspect of memory of what we collectively remember or forget, and this spoke to something a few might recall. Those times when everybody wore a hat. There's a lovely, actually, I think, children's book called by that title, but this is Billy's Collins poem, "The Death of the Hat." Once every man wore a hat. In the ashen newsreels, the avenues of cities are broad rivers flowing with hats. The ballpark swelled with thousands of straw hats, brims and bands, rows of men smoking and cheering in shirt sleeves. Hats were the law. They went without saying. You noticed a man without a hat in a crowd. You bought them from Adams or Dobbs, who branded your initials in gold on the inside band. Trolleys crisscrossed the city. Steamships sailed in and out of the harbor. Men with hats gathered on the docks. There was a person to block your hat and a hat-check girl to mind it, while you had a drink or ate a steak with peas and a baked potato. In your office stood a hat rack. The day the war was declared, everyone in the street was wearing a hat, and they were wearing hats when a ship loaded with men sank in the icy sea. My father wore one to work every day and returned home carrying the evening paper, the winter chill radiating from his overcoat. But today we go bareheaded into the winter streets, stand hatless on frozen platforms. Today the mailboxes on the roadside and the spruce trees behind the house wear cold white hats of snow. Mice scurry from the stone walls at night in their thin fur hats to eat the birdseed that has spilled. And now my father, after a life of work, wears a hat of earth, and on top of that, a lighter one of cloud and sky, a hat of wind. Thank you, Billy Collins. Well, we're percolating along. Okay. On that note is a poem of mine that I composed for a marvelous man, Enrique Enriquez. But a lovely story in memory of his. He's a lover of hats like me. He wears them quite marvelously. And this is the man with many hats. Too many, he said. The first one, now a half-century hat from his grandfather, his abuelo. And of late a few beloved borsalinos, beaucoup de chapeaux, that first appeared naturally on his head at 18, filled ever since with sunlight and birdsong, daydreams and diphthongs. long before urban hipsters and poseurs filled theirs with irony and asynchrony. The Man with Many Hats. A throwback to the 30s is about seeing a man in New York City one day who was like a time machine. This was in March of 2000. A throwback to the 30s. He ambles past. A throwback to the 30s in black and white spectators. A local color character Hammett or Chandler would have cast in the hard-boiled pages of a story, one now brittle with age. The grizzled face, the white hair, the cashmere coat threadbare like the memories of those breezy, snap-brimmed days on the long avenues, big boulevards of old New York. Everything, head down, dulled now, lusterless, everything but those damned immaculate shoes. As some of you know, I'm a lover, an avid keeper, a preserver of old expressions, many of them well before my time. Old chestnuts, well, this lifetime anyway. 3 sheets to the wind. I remember my father saying, one of his favorite sayings, that swashbuckling man who had a way of using words and phrases and telling stories you loved leaning into, sailing through, like his tall drink-of-water father before him, and I a way of telling sense, too, all my own, and preserving expressions like these from extinction, endangered species like 9 ways to Sunday, at 6s and 7s, the cat's pajamas, by keeping them not in amber but in living color, on the page, in the air, filling various ears, doing my part for the best patois to me of generations past, and animating with it memories of those men and a piquant taste of their times. Well, a touch more on the science that I was spelunking around of how memory works, just sort of a curious side note about that. This is from The Guardian of All Things, Michael Malone's book, The Epic Story of Human Memory. It takes a 10,000-year journey into humanity's understanding of our great cognitive record keeper, exploring its power and ongoing perplexity. And he talks about the theory that holds that short-term memory consists of 4, quote, slave systems. First is phonological, for sound and language. The second is continuous rehearsal system. The third is visuospatial sketchpad that stores visual information in mental maps. And the fourth is an episodic buffer that gathers all the diverse information in from all the other slaves and integrates them together into what might be described as a multimedia memory. Well, in the Marginalian has a commentary on this book, and in there they say that one of the most confounding pieces of the whole puzzle is the form of memory known as emotional memory, says Maria Popova in there, because it's a specialized system for cataloging our memories based on the emotions they evoke, and sharpening emotional recall might be the secret to better memory. So Malone ends, or toward the end says, what we do know is that 250,000 years after mankind inherited this remarkable organ called the brain, even with all the tools available to modern science, human memory remains a stunning enigma. How about that? I like the fact there's so many things we still don't know, and maybe we're never going to know, maybe we're not supposed to know. Okay. Linda Pastan has this piece, Remembering Frost, the poet Robert Frost, at Kennedy's inauguration. It's from her collection, Queen of a Rainy Country. Even the flags seemed frozen to their poles, and the men stamping their well-shod feet resembled an army of overcoats. But we were young and fueled by hope. Our ardor burned away the cold. We were the president's, and briefly the president would be ours. The old poet stumbled over his own indelible words, his breath a wreath around his face. A kind of prophecy. Thank you, Linda Pastan. It was a kind of a remembrance I felt, and I have one here. It's something I wrote on witnessing this a solemn gathering, this particular one back in the autumn of 2005 on the Upper West Side of New York City, near where I lived. I came upon this gathering. Monumental men, legions of firemen stand underwater on Riverside and West End, soaked to the blue of their brass-buttoned coats and stiff round hats as they line the streets in the drenching rain to commemorate all the firemen now under stone, those fallen into the flames of history and the quiet of memory. Monumental men who, too, stood here once to honor their heroes. Monumental men. Derek, a man, has a fascinating, M-A-H-O-N, to me, and maybe to you, poem. He wrote it for Seamus Heaney, the poet, the Irish poet Seamus Heaney. It's called Lives. First time out, I was a torch of gold, and wept tears of the sun. That was fun, but they buried me in the earth 2,000 years, till a laborer turned me up with a pick in 1854. Once I was an oar, but stuck in the shore to mark the place of a grave when the lost ship sailed away. I thought of Ithaca, but soon decayed. The time that I liked best was when I was a bump of clay in a Navajo rug, put there to mitigate the too godlike perfection of that merely human artifact. I served my Maker well. He lived long to be struck down in Denver by an electric shock the night the lights went out in Europe, never to shine again. So many lives, so many things to remember. I was a stone in Tibet, a tongue of bark at the heart of Africa, growing darker and darker. It all seems a little unreal now that I am an anthropologist with my own credit card dictaphone, army surplus boots, and a whole boatload of photographic equipment. I know too much to be anything anymore. And if in the distant future someone thinks he has once been me, as I am today, let him revise his insolent ontology or teach himself to pray. Thank you, Derek, man. Well, yes, we have the indelible, my friends, but also the greatly ephemeral, the fleeting and fading, and the natural order of things, including what continues despite our and everyone's eventual disappearance. This poem was from the Puget Sound, Port Townsend, Washington, September 2017. It goes on. When we've gone out with the tide, it goes on. In the cool morning curtain of fog that lifts to sun and warmth, the lazy clang of the channel buoy, the fish and fishermen, sailors and ferry boats going about their business and pleasure, they go on. It all goes on. Octavio Paz has this: wind, water, stone. Water hollows stone. Wind scatters water. Stone stops the wind. Water, wind, stone. Wind carves stone. Stone's a cup of water. Water escapes and is wind. Stone, wind, water. Wind sings in its whirling. Water murmurs going by. Unmoving stone keeps still. Wind, water, stone. Each is another and no other, crossing and vanishing through their empty names. Water, stone, wind. "10 years ago, at the edge of Georgian Bay in Killarney, northern Ontario, Canada, I stood on the great northern shield and drank in the ancient and still alive energy and wordless memory embedded there, rooted down there, bedrock. Antediluvian essence fired from the heart of the earth, cooled and hardened into this red and brick-pink bedrock, this igneous union of mica, feldspar, gneiss, quartz, where jack pines gnarl, grow old, tufts of mosses green and hold, bedrock that sends its energy, history, ancient memory up through my bare souls, up through my bare soul. And speaking of ancient places and surfaces, there's a poem from Greece, from the Aegean, the Cyclades, the ancient island of Kea, where two of the greatest ancient Greek poets happen to have lived and moved, Makalidis and Simonides. And I was there 2 different summers, and I walked in their footsteps. And as I was doing that one of many days, I had this poem rise up in me through those stones. It's called Moving Over Millennia. I actually have an originally scored musical version of this, which if you're interested, let me know. I can share it with you. My feet move over millennia of men's sandaled footsteps on these dromas, rising and falling with the terrain just as they rose and fell on cool marble underfoot, walking under hours of sun, over marble and dry earth scattered with acorn shells, between stone-stacked walls and olive groves, through curtains of cicadas, wind, breath, sometimes with glimpses of celadon and cerulean, oases of sea. My feet move with mindfulness over their millennia. I know we're in winter, but I've been dreaming of spring, and with a bow toward spring to come, and to springs far back in time, memory, place, story. That man of Arden, his hat was a large robin's nest. The buttons on his swallow-tailed coat were dandelions. The soles of his shoes gathered green moss, and in his petal-soft hand he held a blooming trumpet vine, with sweet-colored notes to herald his arrivals and signal his departures in the Ardens and Arcadias of other worlds and far-away, forgotten times. Well, let's remember, shall we, all of our times of great ease, especially in these times of great unease in the world, and maybe in our own immediate lives, for whatever reasons. This is from the Yucatan, from Mexico, 1999. Tear here. You see this picture perfect day. Breeze brushed frond, shadows tickling the sand, pelicans pirouetting through the sea-salted air. You feel the indolencia of this free, flowing space south of the world, clouds miming the slow somersaults of sea, no traces of clocks or calendars. Follow that faint line dotting the water's edge. Just tear here and file this day away in a drawer of your memory for future reference. What about music that has infused or stayed with us, with you, and the musicians of bygone times that we sometimes summon back up, either in our minds or on our phones, or some other method of listening to them, and their instruments, sometimes like living things. When they were that connected with them. Well, back in 2015 spring, I was in Lichterfeldost in Berlin, and at this lovely house, Ritterstrasse number 1, Nummer 1. And there was this marvelous old Victrola, and I sat, mused on it. This is what happened. The old Victrola. When you were young, what songs blossomed from the golden flower of your mouth? What music floated out when the silver needle fell, when the sitters, the dancers, tilted their ears their bodies in the long room leavened, like now, with March light ladling in through these near and far French doors, unto the blonde wood floors, the dove-gray walls, unto their bare calves, their soft hands. The old Victrola. I also once imagined, if I was a kind of playable musical instrument, what would I be? And whimsically enough, I suppose, in some way, in one July, a few years back, I decided I was a hurdy-gurdy. Of course, a play on the hurdy-gurdy. Is an instrumental man whose music plays when the rosined wheel of his heart rubs against the limber strings of his discoverings. A man of many keys, melodies, constant pitch, often buzzing bridge, whose songs speak of sweet longings, long ago worlds, hidden wonders, wandering minstrel dreams, dancing memories. I was thinking of a story a friend of mine told me about memory palaces, and there were some ancient Greeks and others who were able to, by using that process or originating it, remember incredible things, details. It's called, this is from Wikipedia, it's called the Method of Loci. Loci is Latin for places, and it's a strategy of memory enhancement which uses visualizations of familiar spatial environments to enhance the recall of information, which is also known as memory palace, memory journey, or palace. So it's a mnemonic device that was adopted in ancient Roman and Greek treatises. And in the technique, you memorize the layout of some building or arrangement of shops in a street, or and when you desire to remember a set of items, the subject you walk through these loci in your imagination and commit an item to each one of those spots by forming an image between the item and any feature of that locus. So you achieve the retrieval by walking back through those rooms or places to activate the items. It's been a well-established technique. Very interesting if you don't know about it. I had forgotten about it till I was putting our show together. Okay, well, I'm going to take a few things out as we go because I want to keep on good time with us. But I was thinking of sort of the memory places, and I was thinking of some poems of place. Donald Justice's poem, Memory of a Porch. This is from Miami, 1942. What I remember is how the wind chime commenced to stir as she spoke of her childhood, as though the simple death of a pet cat buried with flowers had brought to the porch a rumor of storms dying out over the dark Atlantic. At least I heard the thing begin, a thin skeletal music, and in the deep silence, below all memory, the sighing of ferns half asleep in their boxes. Donald Justice. That. Interesting. It's one of mine for you from Maine, Sullivan, Maine, September 1998. The Mise en Scène at the Island View Inn, number 1. 2 lacy iron chairs touch elbows on the lawn, waiting whitely for the ladies of the 1880s with their parasols and lemonade, while pink geraniums spilled from fluted urns by the warm wooden stairs to the stone and seaweed beach. A flotilla of slatted and slanting Adirondacks face the glass bay, watching for whales or wild Indians. The wide porch undulates with rockers and memories of 100 summers, and an ebb tide of crickets mingles with breaths of salted wind. In a cocktail of Maine September, where a soft woman in a wicker swing reads away through the shade. There's Ted Kusser in the basement of the Goodwill store, in musty light in the thin brown air of damp carpet, doll heads and rust, beneath long rows of sharp footfalls like nails in a lid. An old man stands trying on glasses, lifting each pair from the box like a glittering fish and holding it up to the light of a dirty bulb. Near him, a heap of enameled pans as white as skulls looms in the catacomb shadows, and old toilets with dried red throats cough up bouquets of curtain rods. You've seen him somewhere before. He's wearing the green leisure suit you threw out with the garbage, and the Christmas tie you hated, and the ventilated wingtip shoes you found in your father's closet and wore as a joke, and the glasses which finally fit him. through which he looks to see you looking back, two mirrors which flash and glance, are those through which one day you too will look down over the years, when you have grown old and thin and no longer particular, and the things you once thought you were rid of forever have taken you back in their arms. I get to Kusser. Appearings and disappearings in our past and present, our minds, our spirits. Mark Strand's poem, The Garden, which he wrote for Robert Penn Warren, another poet. It shines in the garden, in the white foliage of the chestnut tree, in the brim of my father's hat as he walks on the gravel. In the garden, suspended in time, my mother sits in a redwood chair. Light fills the sky, the folds of her dress, the roses tangled beside her. And when my father bends to whisper in her ear, when they rise to leave and the swallows dart and the moon and stars have drifted off together, it shines. Even as you lean over this page, late and alone, it shines. Even now, in the moment, before it disappears. Thank you, Mark Strand. Well, there's much to be said about treasuring memories, but not living in the past, rather wildly embracing everything present and bringing in, summoning up where it doesn't. We don't lose ourselves. Those memories of other times. Rainer Maria Rilke's poem from Paris, 1909. Forget, forget, and let us live now. Only this. How the stars pierce through cleared nocturnal sky. How the moon's whole disk surmounts the gardens. We've sensed so long already how the darkness breeds many mirrors, how a gleam takes shape, a white shadow in the radiance of night. But now let us cross over and invest this world where everything is lunar. One more, Billy Collins, because it's actually one of the subjects I wanted to give another underscore to, which is forgetfulness. The name of the author is the first to go, followed obediently by the title, the plot, the heartbreaking conclusion, the entire novel, which suddenly becomes one you have never read, never even heard of, as if one by one the memories you used to harbor decided to retire to the southern hemisphere of the brain, to a little fishing village where there are no phones. Long ago you kissed the names of the 9 muses goodbye, and watch the quadratic equation pack its bag, and even now, as you memorize the order of the planets, something else is slipping away. A state flower, perhaps, the address of an uncle, the capital of Paraguay. Whatever it is you are struggling to remember, it is not poised on the tip of your tongue, or even lurking in some obscure corner of your spleen. It has floated away down a dark, mythological river whose name begins with an L as far as you can recall. Well on your own way to oblivion, where you will join those who have even forgotten how to swim and how to ride a bicycle. No wonder you rise in the middle of the night to look up the date of a famous battle in a book on war. No wonder the moon in the window seems to have drifted out of a love poem that you used to know by heart. Billy Collins. Well, there is some mystery, I'd say, with memory. What about magic? This is the Magic Memory Act. Reaching back more and more remarkably the older you get and attempting to pull rabbits out of the hat of your memory. Rob Bresney says this, you have the keys. You have the keys to promising doors that don't exist yet. Save those keys. You know the titles of rousing stories that haven't happened yet. Write those titles down. You've caught glimpses of your best future, but they're confusing because you can't imagine how you'll get to that future. Imprint those glimpses on your memory. So I come to the last few sharings right now. Harness by Jane Hirschfield. Little soul, you and I will become the memory of a memory of a memory. A horse released of the traces forgets the weight of the wagon. David White. What to remember when waking. In that first hardly noticed moment to which you wake, coming back to this life from the other more secret, movable, and frighteningly honest world where everything began, there is a small opening into the new day which closes the moment you begin your plans. What you can plan is too small for you to live. What you can live wholeheartedly will make plans enough for the vitality hidden in your sleep. To be human is to become visible while carrying what is hidden as a gift to others. To remember the other world in this world is to live in your true inheritance. You are not a troubled guest on this earth. You are not an accident amidst other accidents. You were invited from another and greater night than the one from which you have just emerged. Now, looking through the slanting light of the morning window toward the mountain presence of everything that can be, what urgency calls you to your one love? What shape waits in the seed of you to grow and spread its branches against a future sky? Is it waiting in the fertile sea, in the trees beyond the house, in the life you can imagine for yourself, in the open and lovely white page on the waiting desk? Thank you, David White. And next to last, remembering my gentle grandmother as a boy in her garden, Maplewood, New Jersey, once upon a time. You and your blue hydrangeas. For my greatly loved grandmother, Lillian, long gone. A clear moment of early memory, when I beheld you among your bountiful blue hydrangeas. There blooms the shade of Uncle Frank's eyes, somewhere between porcelain and periwinkle. The color of your soul, I think, blended now with the endless, ocean-born sky. And last for now, for you, drink from the well. Draw from the well, the deep well, the cool, clear wellspring of your memory. Drink at will, at ease, from the dipped ladle or cupped hands. The fresh waters of your best rememberings, cherished unforgettings. The well you keep refilling, never to fall low or ever run dry. Thank you again, each and all, for leaning in, floating in, and feeling in. And to listeners like Isabel in Baltimore, who said, "Your broadcast speaks volumes to me." And Pat here in Rhode Island, thank you, packed again with timely, thought-provoking sharings. You're a wonderful, much appreciated, and growing body of listeners, a thoughtful, heartful community I'm delighted to have and serve. If you have a question, comment, or kudo, please send me a note. I'd be delighted to hear from you. My email is colin@thepoetorialist.com. If you'd like to express your thanks for this show or other past shows with a donation, I'd welcome it. Support from listeners helps make all my work on these free weekly shows more easeful. You can contribute by PayPal or Venmo or directly through my site, thepoetorialist.com, at the Donate tab there, or by mail to me at P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891. Patrons desiring to host me as a working artist, poet in residence to shape a new flight of poetic art and dedicate it to you, let's discuss the opportunities. I'd also welcome invitations to be a virtual artist in residence, a poetic presence for an online community. You can hear all the broadcasts online on YouTube on the Floating Poetry playlist. I hope you'll lean in soon again. Until then, dear listeners, here's to having, creating, and embodying many wonderfully unforgettable experiences, gem-like touchstones to revisit, recall, and refeel across time, draw from the well of and drink afresh from in the future. And appreciate how preciously fleeting or fading so many moments are, how beautifully, if also poignantly impermanent, some parts of our own life journeys and those with others are, that make them all the more treasurable. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.